We take a single episode of a science fiction TV series and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. This is the Fusion Patrol Podcast. Welcome to the discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And tonight we're looking at the Prisoner episode, Hammer Into Anvil. A young woman, number 73, is being interrogated about her unfaithful husband in the village hospital by number 2. She has unsuccessfully tried to kill herself. She screams, and halfway across the village, number 6 hears a damsel in distress and runs to the rescue. He cannot save her as she jumps to her death. Number 2 is furious at number 6 for his interference. "You'll pay for this," he says. "No," says number 6, "you will." Number 2 then calls number 6 into his office. When he refuses to come, number 2 sends goons to rough him up and bring him in. Number 2 presents himself as a hardened sadist who will break number 6. Number 6 sees him as a weak martinet afraid of his superiors. Number 6 hatches a plan. Through a series of strange activities, number 6 convinces number 2 that he is a plant spying on number 2. As number 2's paranoia grows, he becomes increasingly unable to effectively manage the village. Eventually, number 2 cracks and must report himself for failure. Number 6 has won, but he is still a prisoner. So, what do you think of this episode?
It's a good, fun episode. There's not a lot to it, as perhaps is evident from your rather brief précis, but what there is, I enjoyed.
Yes, I enjoyed the episode as well. It was kind of more spy-like.
Yes.
You know, we're actually getting a little bit of number 6 using his, not just his abilities as a spy, but his brain, because of course he's playing games with somebody who would think like a spy too. So, posting secret notes and sending blank sheets of paper, which of course must obviously contain secret notes. All of that is a very well orchestrated attack on number 2. I don't know if you want to say attack on his sanity, but attack on his grounding in being in charge inside the village.
Yes, I wasn't sure whether it was. It didn't necessarily reflect his true tradecraft, because obviously he's not trying to actually do anything secretive or to get anything past number 2. He's deliberately trying to appear to be doing that. So it's almost like he's turning himself into a parody of a secret agent. Mm-hmm. But it's good fun. I like all the little touches, listening to the copies of the same record, and as you say, running around with sheets of blank paper, knowing that number 2 is going to tear his hair out over the fact that he can't find anything on them. Yeah, it
kind of falls apart in places. So, for example, if number 6 really were a spy, he made a report by leaving the blank paper on the boat, but number 2 intercepted it, so it never got to its intended person, if he'd been thinking about that. And the same is true with a pigeon. Number 6 releases that pigeon with the note attached, which they then intercept and get the note. And the note is a note telling whoever number 6's fake superior is to be ready for a message at 6 o'clock. But then when he comes along to send the 6 o'clock message, they're confused because there's no one out there to receive the message. It's like, well, you intercepted the message telling them to be waiting for a message, so it makes perfect sense that they're not there, but number 6 wouldn't know that. So, there's a couple of things there that don't quite jive, but
yeah, I didn't actually notice that, but there were elements of it where, for example, with the secret writing on the paper, the fact that he didn't use any kind of code. So number 2 was just reading, dear X04. You are right about number 2's instability. I will send a full report. And partly what's the point? But also, it's surprisingly insecure. But the one that interested me the most was when, because I think maybe it tells us something about number 6's background and the extent to which the village have infiltrated the organisation for which number 6 used to work. or at least this is the only inference I can make from it. He sends the patty cake message, and number 2 gets them to feed it through the machine, and it comes out, and the machine is supposed to be a computer that can presumably decipher any cipher that is known to it. They use it earlier on, and it works, which seems quite impressive. Mm-hmm. But a comment later on makes it clear that the reason that it works is because it has to be programmed with all the different known ciphers. And number 2 is surprised that number 6 has used a code that the computer is not aware of. So to me, that suggests that the village operation have access to every code in the code book that number 6 would have used as an agent for, well,
whoever he worked for,
we presume, whoever he was working for before. They would have access to every single code that he would have used and have programmed it into the computer.
That's a good point. I mean, I don't know that I took it that way, but you're right. That is basically what they say. I guess it's because they're standing in a computer, and whenever I hear dialogue from someone standing at a computer, particularly as we go back into the dark ages of computer illiteracy, I just assume they don't know what they're talking about, and that the computer was actually...
I'm not sure things have got better. I think
no.
They're being a little over-optimistic.
True, particularly in real life too, but but in television programs or movies, the fact that he says, "Oh, it doesn't know the code," to me, I assume that they put it in there and it just brute force beat the code. That it's a cryptographically cracking program, and that it didn't need to know the code; it just worked it out. That's how I interpreted it.
Well, I mean that was my interpretation.
That's
the
not his
first time
dialogue.
it was used, yes. But the later dialogue suggests that that's not the case, but which is good in a way. I mean, it makes the computer seem like a more realistic piece of machinery.
Okay, but never would I believe. In fact, no, I know it cannot be done. If you take a nursery rhyme, patty cake, baker's man, bake me a cake as fast as you can. Well known. It's been there since hundreds of years. He didn't write it. There's no way that he could have hidden a message in the lettering or the paper or something. He sent it by Morse code. So we are talking about something that has no additional subtext to it whatsoever, unless it had to do with the timing of the Morse code, which they didn't use. They just wrote down the Morse code letters. He spelled out a nursery rhyme that is without error. It is exactly the way it is. That cannot be a code. It cannot be a code. It can only be an action phrase. Like that might be the pre-agreed thing to say number 2 needs to be replaced or something of that nature. Yes, but it cannot be a code.
Or something a little bit more generic, because obviously it'd be unlikely for it to fit with that particular solution. But clearly there are a number of possible code books that could contain those phrases. I think you're right. It couldn't possibly be a cipher, but the computer is maybe a quick way of cross-referencing against all those possibilities. And what it tells us is it's drawn a blank. It's not used as a phrase in any code book that number 6 is known to have ever had access to.
Okay, fair enough. I'll go along with that.
I mean, that did kind of make sense to me. The thing that didn't make so much sense to me was they had a quadruplet of... was it double or triple digit numbers? Mm-hmm. Which I think was the code they ran through the computer the first time. And they managed to get an awful lot of data out of that.
That's true. So, I don't have that in front of me, but you're right. It was only, 10 numbers at the most.
Yes.
And the message, let's see, that particular message was that was not the one that said a report follows. That was talking about... I don't remember what that one was word for word, but it was a lot.
I can't remember what the exact message was, but again...
Oh, no, that was the Pigeon one. That was the one that said, "I'll send you a message on the beach."
Yes.
That was right.
Yes, quite right. It was short because he had to tie it to the pigeon, yeah. So, so indeed, the only way that code could have carried that much information is that those numbers actually referred to particular sentences that could make up the code somehow. In which case, the only way of making it secure would be to have some kind of prearranged agreement about which code you were using. I don't see how the machine could possibly have told which code they used unless they only used one code of that type, which would be very, very insecure. So again, it's questionable. But you'll have to let these things pass, I guess.
That's pretty much it. You have to let it pass. You just have to kind of let this one, enjoy this one and watch where it's going, and go, all right, well, yeah, that would not be a very good, that would not be a very good cut.
And while we're on the pigeon question and talking of things, letting things go, I did find myself unable to quite release myself from the nagging worry about exactly how much force would be needed to incapacitate a pigeon in flight, not only to ensure that the message itself wasn't damaged in weight, but actually, as we saw in the subsequent scene, the pigeon was completely unharmed by it.
Yes, that was kind of interesting, wasn't it? There is like a little bit extra in the script around that part, and where it's just, I think they're about to shoot the pigeon on a high power. I think that's extra. And number 2,
microwave it,
forces them to bring it down to low power. But I think that's marked as a cut scene. I don't remember seeing it, but
no, that is mentioned. That is mentioned.
He did mention putting it on low power. Okay,
he does intervene to say that. But you'd still. I mean, it's not quite clear to me what kind of weapon it is. Is it an energy weapon?
Apparently so.
Talking about power, or does it just
the pigeon incapacitator?
Indeed. I mean, what he doesn't say is, use the kind of tranquilizer dart or whatever.
And don't shoot it when it's over the water.
Yes. That wouldn't do much for the message either. I don't know whether your book says anything about the pigeon itself. I certainly wasn't able to find anything on IMDb.
The pigeon's name?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a good performance from the pigeon. I thought it did well, and so I wondered whether it had appeared in other things. For example, it's not the same pigeon in Moonraker, is it?
The one that does the double take.
Yes.
Actually, that could be.
Because I was curious because obviously Moonraker is some 12 years later or so, whether a pigeon's lifespan would be long enough, but. I was pleased to find there's a web forum called Pigeon Talk, and on there was some discussion about the lifespan for pigeons, but there was some consensus around the fact that although a wild pigeon might only live for 3 or 5 years, a pigeon in captivity might average around 15 years. So if it was a well looked after stunt pigeon working in the film industry, it could have lasted long enough to appear in Moonraker, even if it isn't actually the same pigeon that appears in the episode of Blackadder Goes Forth, in which Blackadder gets court-martialed.
Good point. And the pigeon, I think, in Moonraker is a little bit grayer. So, but that could just be age. Yeah. That could just be age.
I mean, there can't be that many, stunt acting pigeons around.
They probably have their own union. Equity for Pigeons. Well, enough of this pigeon talk. Well, that is possibly one of the more serious discussions we have had on the acting. Interesting thing about the acting, though, in the episode, the guy who plays number 2, Patrick Cargill, also appears in Many Happy Returns as is it Thorpe? It's the Colonel's man who doesn't believe him, his right-hand man.
No, I didn't register.
The reason they did that is because these 2 episodes were shot back to back. This one was shot first, and they liked the guy so much they just had him stay on and play another part in the next episode. Apparently, I'm guessing that if you can get along with Patrick McGoohan, then they probably say, why don't you stick around for another show? Because Patty over there is a little sometimes.
It's interesting how often actors do get recycled in some of these things into different roles. Possibly less so now than they did around this time, I think. Possibly because of things like DVDs and whatever, where we're much more likely to go back over it and spot these things. Whereas at the time, performance one week, you might not, particularly in a relatively small role, you might not memorize someone's face or whatever.
Nowadays, if you had a guy who was playing like a small but important part in Pompeii or something, you could not get a job as a major character in that same series a few years later. I don't know.
Good point. There are examples of it, though apparently we are going to get an explanation that...
I don't want that.
Russell T Davies had an explanation for why Frobisher in Torchwood appeared to be the same, have the same face. And so Moffat's asked him what it is. And
it's a message from the Time Lords.
It'll be something ridiculous like that. I'm just rewatching some old Avengers, and I've got onto the second season. And already, Edwin Richfield, who appeared in about 6 different episodes of The Avengers, has come back, having been in the first season. He's now playing a different role in the second season. Very, and major roles, both of them. Very recognisable actor. But that just seemed to be the kind of general approach in this, that maybe in view of the fact that television at the time was slightly more theatrical, that people were expected to just suspend disbelief and treat it more as watching a rep than we would now.
I don't have a lot of problem with it. I mean, I could see how if you went from one episode to the next on a TV show, and that might be a problem. But if it were the next year, it wouldn't bother me at all. If the actor's any good, if they only have, if they're a one-note actor, they can only play one part. That might be different, but I
agree. I think there are a lot of actors who I'm absolutely delighted, appear in several episodes of my favourite series. Obviously, long-running shows like Doctor Who, there's an awful lot of it happens, but I mean, the number of other examples of actors in the Avengers who I know of: Geoffrey Palmer, Peter Bowles, right, who has already been in Prisoner.
Geoffrey Palmer would have made a good number 2.
Yes, he would. Oh, yes. It would have been superb.
Well, anyway, so let's talk a little bit. Speaking of actors in the show, another one, and I can't think of his name, so sorry about that, who was apparently fairly well known, was the guy who played the band conductor. Well known at that time. And he did that one scene part just to be in a Patrick McGoohan show, apparently. Because it was like
unlike all the other people who refused to appear in anything with him ever again.
Yeah, he apparently requested to be in Patrick McGoohan's new series. I don't know if that's because he liked Patrick McGoohan or whether he heard something about the series or what the situation was. But that wasn't even him at the bandstand. That was doubles. But when he's in number 2's office, there's just that one scene. So, or he wasn't on location. Let's put it that way. I don't know. I honestly don't know what his name is, and I didn't recognize him. I'd recognize a lot of bit part. I don't want to say bit part actors. That's not fair. This guy apparently was more than that. But there's a certain amount of British shows that do make it to the United States, particularly back in the 60s and 70s, and then there's a significant portion of them that don't make it to the United States. And so sometimes somebody who would be quite famous in Britain, we wouldn't know. The guy who played, is it Alfie in Till Death Us Do Part?
Alf Garnett.
Yeah.
Warren Mitchell.
No one would recognize him over here.
Really?
No, because that show never made it here. They remade it over here as an American show. And God. Which was All in the Family and went for, 10, 15 Emmy Award winning years. But, and was an extremely popular show, but that basically killed any chance of that show ever being brought over to the United States. So, but I know I see him in other things. Was he in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang?
Possibly. I don't remember. He appeared in 3 episodes of The Avengers, though, I happen to know, 2 of which he appeared as the same character. He came back because it was such a good character.
Well, that's my point. I'd see him. I might have seen him in shows, and he would pop up, and I would recognize the face from one appearance to another, but I wouldn't know he was famous.
Sure.
That's the thing. And so the guy who was doing the bandstand, if he was famous at one time, I wouldn't know it or recognize him in this case. But
a Kevin Bacon of his time, perhaps.
who I don't know if I'd recognize, but hey. But I understand I'm 3 degrees removed from him somehow, but I don't know how.
Wow. I haven't calculated my number, but I suspect it's...
I thought everyone was. I thought everyone on the planet was 3 degrees removed from him.
I thought it was 6.
Is it 6? Oh, well, I don't feel so special. Or perhaps he shouldn't feel as special. Depends on how you want to look at that. Anyway, let's see what else is going on in this episode. So we had the let's look at his spy activities. My favorite is the records. So they go to the music store. There are 6 copies of a new record that's just in. And he takes all 6 of them back to the listening booths, which, wow, is that a throwback to a time that doesn't exist. And listens to each one with his watch, timing it so that the shopkeeper is like, what is going on there? And then, circles one word in the newspaper, takes the records back, leaves the newspaper behind, and off he goes. Very clever. It's a very clever way to make people either think you're nuts or that you're up to something, right? I mean,
it works. It works if people don't think you're nuts.
Exactly.
And obviously,
they think
number 6 is taken seriously.
No one thinks that man's going to crack. I think that's pretty much what we've been led to believe in this, even by the psychiatrist in this episode. He's like, not according to my reports, he's stable. So.
But here's my thing about this one. I liked it. It's a really nice bit of tradecraft to kind of play with. The guy in the shop takes the 6 records to number 2 with the newspaper, with the word circled. And they listen to a couple of them and say, can't tell the difference, right? Mm-hmm. And the guy in the shop has forgotten which one was the one that's different. Now, later in the episode, number 2 has a way of
good catch.
Testing the voice for the phone call has been made to number 249. Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
To prove that it is number 6 who has called him. And he does a voice match. And he shows on the oscilloscope the same pattern of the same vowel sound in number 6's voice. If they've got that kind of technology where they can do pinpointing voice recognition like that, how come they can't just play the records through all 6 recordings through the oscilloscope and do a difference test on them, find out whether there are any differences?
It can only test one word at a time. So you know how much data is involved in one word? I mean, back in them, that was those days. That was all the computing power we had in North America. So,
but they know that he's doing it with a stopwatch. So even if they just they just got 6 record players out and put them all on at the same time, they could
spot which one's wrong.
Yeah, because if once you've got it synchronized, they'll all sound the same. The second one of them goes out, you've hit the point where their message is. Another one that's fun. It just seems extraordinary not to have that technology.
Yeah, another one that's fun but doesn't stand up to a lot of close scrutiny. Speaking of the magic voice machine, going through the script book, there was very, very little different from the shot script from the script to the shot product. The 2 things that really stand out are that number 2 is a lot more emotional throughout the course of the episode. He's a lot more
in the script
disturbed, and the director toned that down during the. So this is a case where the writer actually put, just how distraught he was, and they toned that down.
So I mean, that's interesting in the context of one of the things I wondered about the choices that were made in this episode, because for one thing, the whole premise is supposed to be based around this Goethe quote, right? Either you're a hammer or you're an anvil. But I don't know. I didn't recognise where this quote came from. It's Faustus, is it?
It's Faust, yeah. No, it's Faust, not Faustus. So the Goethe, well, I don't know. Dr. Faustus was the older story, and then the poem by Goethe was just Faust, I think. I could be wrong. Never mind. I could be wrong. It's like, I'm not going to quote I'm definitely not going to be the definitive expert on that one.
I went looking up the quote because it didn't. I mean, I like Goethe, but it didn't seem to me that intelligent a metaphor. So I went looking it up, and of all places, I found an interesting, quite an erudite discussion on Yahoo Answers, which is usually the place I go when I want to know whether something I've defrosted is still edible to eat.
Right. And was it? Oh, never mind.
Well, I usually assume it is.
The pigeon was, yes.
Yeah, defrosted pigeon. There are enough people answering on there that you'll find someone who says what you want them to say. There was an interesting discussion about the kind of the idea behind this and whether it was true, and the idea being that you're either the person who is controlling who's in control, who is essentially has the power, and the power derives from the fact they have the power over the other person. But and that's the sense I assume we're supposed to take from it. But the actual metaphor doesn't really support that. And someone quoted a poem by John Clifford, which is called "The Anvil of God's Word." "Last eve I passed a blacksmith's door, and heard the anvil ring the vesper chime. When looking in I saw upon the floor old hammers worn with beating years of time. 'How many anvils have you had,' said I, 'to wear and batter these hammers so?' 'Just one,' said he, then with a twinkling eye, 'The anvils wears the hammers out, you know.'" I just don't get the idea that, an anvil isn't something that gives when you put, as someone else said, the tools work together. It's the metal that in between that gives. The tools are really part of the same apparatus in order to shape the metal. And the anvil lasts as much as the hammer does. The hammer seems to do the work, but the anvil just stays steady, stays unharmed.
Well, I wonder if there's more to... You absolutely correct. I agree that the metaphor, it's a poor, as phrased that way, it's a poor put of the metaphor, because you're right. Whatever's between the hammer and the anvil is what gets shaped. And then it would seem like a poor metaphor if we just ignored that and went with the obvious, that it's really the hammer that gets damaged instead of the anvil. But maybe I'll give the writer a little more credit. Maybe that's what we were supposed to go look up on Wikipedia or wherever back then, because he tells us the quote, tells us who the quote's from. And clearly, number two is thinking that is exactly that. I am the force that, damages the anvil is what he is saying.
He's desperate to be the one who does have dominion over others, because he thinks that's where strength comes from.
And number 6 knows that quote because he doesn't necessarily know that quote. He just translates it from German. And then number 2 is impressed. But let's say he does know the quote. Maybe he's looking at that going, no, you've missed the point. It's the hammer that gets broken. And they don't spell it out for us, but if you were to go out and start looking at discussions as you have found, you would see that maybe number 6 knew that all along. I will break the hammer then.
Perhaps. I mean, I don't know whether it's best to be one or the other. And I mean, the thing that strikes me in terms of this, and I don't know whether this is intended in the writing, because the fact you've just revealed about the fact that the director toned down number 6's passion in this, because obviously what we get with number 2 is he starts off, he's obviously quite a weak character. He starts off trying to be this hammer, and he becomes more and more emotionally frayed, shall we say, through the episode as number 6 plays with him. But number 6 doesn't strike with brute force. It's not like a hammer to an anvil. He strikes with surgical precision. He knows where to push the buttons to stoke number 2's paranoia. It reminds me a little bit of that wonderful scene in The Christmas Invasion in Doctor Who, where the Doctor clearly becomes incredibly angry at Harriet Jones' action in shooting down the Sycorax.
Prime Minister.
But he doesn't react in a violent or brutal way. He just says, "I can bring your government down with 6 words." And that's the kind of precision that number 6 seems to be employing in this. He's using a few they're almost trivial, insignificant actions, except that he knows that he's being monitored, and he knows that number 2's curiosity will mean that he worries over these things and does all he makes number 2 do all the work, right down to that last moment where number 2 says, are you going to report me? And he says, no, you're going to report yourself. He doesn't do any of the work. He just pushes number 2's buttons.
So there's another less deep and profound statement out there in the world that you may hear from time to time, that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And
yes,
of course, that's an indictment about people not using the correct tool to solve a correct problem because you're blind to what you have. And number 6, as you point out, has rightly used different tools to achieve the goal here.
Because number 2 only sees nails.
Yeah. So again, it's just it's a poor craftsman in the case of number 2. He doesn't have the toolkit. He doesn't have the repertoire to do anything but be a hammer. And number 6 is capable of
and he hammers number 73, and it destroys her. But number 6 is too agile, too intelligent, too deft. And so he brings about number 2's downfall. How
about that sprint across the village when she screams? I find that hard to believe that's the first scream that ever came out of that hospital.
Yeah.
But
he is outside the hospital at the time, isn't he?
He just looks to me like he's further away. Looks to me like he's more near the common, but not only does he manage to hear it, identify it as someone that he needs to go help, runs across to get to it, goes into the hospital, goes right to the room where it came from.
I can buy him going to the hospital and working out it comes from there. But, I've been in hospitals.
There's
Even
lots
if
of
I know
screaming.
Exactly where I'm supposed to be going, I can't find my way there. So the idea that, even when he doesn't know which room the noise has come from, he could get there so quickly is astonishing.
So, yeah, that was, all right, fine. But it's interesting that have we ever really seen number 6 take an active interest in something like that in the village? I'm not saying that he wouldn't help people, but that seems unusually proactive for him under the circumstances.
Yes, you'd
be expecting a trap.
You'd expect, a certain amount of suspicion on his part. So.
But that just seemed to be, I'm the hero guy, and off he goes, kind of thing.
Yes.
So, we also have number 2's right-hand man, number 14, who is obviously, to number 2's sadistic martinet, he is the sadistic henchman. Clearly not very bright, I don't think, or doesn't seem to come off that way. Not stupid, but he's not. He's muscle for number 2.
I did wonder whether it was a ploy at some point, and whether there actually was a spy on, keeping an eye on number 2, and he was it. But no, he was as intelligent as he appeared.
Right. In the end, he sees what's happening though, to some degree. Putting the poison in. And first off, he tries to vanquish number 6 in a game of Kosho, our exciting thing. Bouncy trampolini pools and baton or bat thing. I don't know.
At least it was short.
It was short. Did it make any sense?
No.
Okay, good. What I interpreted when watching it was that they were playing a game against each other. And then when the other 2 came in, the next contestants, number 6 seemed to, give him a hand. Here, I'll help you. Like they were chums. And so my interpretation on that was that he was, for witnesses, he was trying to appear as if perhaps they were closer than they were. The script book says that they're clearly trying to kill each other. That they're supposed to be, playing within the rules, but trying to actually kill the other player. And that when the other 2 people come in, they both back off, realizing they're not going to get away with it. don't get that at all.
No, I don't think that came across. Not to me.
I think probably being the exact same footage we saw before didn't help.
True.
Let's see. Oh, the other thing. So there was, even though I just said that was in the script, but the other thing that was different, that does make sense in the script, was that when number 6 called the psychiatrist, he disguised his voice.
Ah.
See,
hence.
now the machine makes sense. Otherwise,
Yes.
it's kind of stupid. You hear number 6 saying, and they go, well, I can prove that's number 6 saying that. It's like, I don't need proof. I can hear it's number 6.
Well, quite, and it wasn't like he was denying it was number 6. He was just saying, I don't know anything about this. And I have to say that was one of the slightly odd things about the way that number 2 reacted to everything, because it seems to me that once the suspicion is there, it's planted in his head that he is being spied upon by number 6, or he's being spied upon, and number 6 is the agent spying upon him. He has a choice, which is either he can confront number 6, or he can leave number 6 in place, knowing that it'll be reported, everything that he says will be reported back, and he can work out a way of dealing with it, and in particular he can find out who else is involved. But if anyone else is involved, the same thing would apply, in that anything he says to them he should expect would be reported back. So it's odd that he treats 249, for example, differently, because he does confront him head on and accuse him. And yet, if his suspicions are correct, if 249 is working for number 6 and therefore he will report back as well, then everything that he says there will go straight back.
Right.
So if that's his approach, why doesn't he just, as number 249 asks, why don't you just ask number 6? Why don't you confront him? It does get addressed slightly in the final confrontation, because number 6 says, if I am working for them, then I will report this back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true, but it meant that number 2's kind of growing paranoia didn't quite stack up, because either he's starting to suspect everybody and therefore feel that he is losing his power, or he feels that he's powerful enough to force everyone to do what he wants. In which case, why doesn't he confront number 6?
And if he was more irrational throughout the episode, as originally written, then maybe you could pass it off as being the glands talking instead of the brain. You're paranoid, yet you think they're their boss, and you confront them, and I know what you're up to. You can't fool me. It's not a thinking response. It's an emotional response. So.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So did number 6 kill number 14 there at the end? They had a fight at the end of the episode where number 14's been kicked out. He's lost his job because number 6 has made it look like he's part of the conspiracy, and he bursts into number 6's room, and they have a dust up, and then number 6 throws him out the window, which when the window's broken...
Door. Was it the window?
No, he threw him out a window. And it's really the first time we get a good look outside the window. He looks like he's up on the cliff. So, I mean, it's a painting outside, obviously, but, you're not just looking onto the village green. You're actually looking, kind of down onto the upper parts of buildings. So, which, of course, totally does not fit with his house.
Our understanding of the topography of the village and where number 6 is
placed. It's a bit like Hogwarts.
It would have to be, yes.
Depends on whether his cottage is actually in Port Merion or whether it's in the studio at Bournemouth or wherever it was.
There does seem to be a certain amount of cutting back and forth between location and studio shots in this one. Though I did think reasonably well done.
Yeah, that's true with that's true with a lot, well, not all of, but a lot of the episodes. I mean, they don't shoot any studio stuff in Port Merion, so... Any episode that has Port Merion in it, actual locations, does have to cut back and forth between the studio. But this one was shot in the end of the first filming block, apparently, in Port Merion. So they were on location, although a lot of the shots you see of McGowan are his stunt double, as well as the other actors. I think they did that for time or convenience, but... Anyway, yeah, that's what I was kind of wondering, because we don't see number 14 anymore once he goes out the window, and it could be a long way down, or he could just be lying there in the garden thinking, oh, well, I guess I'll quit or something. I don't know.
So that fight at the end there to Bizet, is that, I mean, I've seen fights to classical music a number of times. I think the first time I saw it was in an episode of Due South, but I've subsequently seen older things that use it.
That Canadian show, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Is this the earliest example of that?
I don't know. That might be a Google search.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to search for. I would
fight set to classical music. That's what I would check.
Yeah, that would work.
Who knows? There's probably a web page for that. I don't know. I can't call any to mind. I can't call the one in Due South to mind, for that matter.
I couldn't tell you which episode it was anymore.
All I can ever remember is Due South always would have the sort of regrettable contemporary music periodically in it, instead of that is a trend I don't care for in TV shows. They do it in House and all sorts of, where they just put some contemporary piece of music which is going to sound so horribly dated in 30 years.
Yes. Yeah, not so much that, but it's rather than using the kind of exciting, because it's playing against the kind of genre norm. When you have a fight, that's normally when, take the Avengers for example. That's when all the brass and drums comes in, the exciting stuff, and so it's upbeat and noisy, and there's no dialogue, so the levels go right up. So you get
Moonraker to opera. Sorry.
Yeah, you get the fights on and the noise and it's all terribly exciting, and so playing a very kind of sedate, serene piece of classical music while two men beat the crap out of each other on the screen is playing what you're hearing against what you're seeing. It's there's a dissonance in it, which I think can work really well. It does work well in this, but it feels quite different from even what we usually get in the Prisoner. So I wondered if that was breaking ground at the time. But I don't know, maybe our listeners will know of other examples of this happening in earlier shows.
I can't think of one. I can't think of any. Earlier shows for me will probably mostly be American, and then they still barely put a classical music in any of those. That long hair music, nobody. That's just communist. He wouldn't do that. I wish I was joking. I really wish I was joking. So why doesn't number 6 interrogate number 2? He's got him broken. Surely he could use that opportunity to get some information out of number 2 about who's running the village, or something that he could use.
Good question. Didn't occur to me, but now you say it, it seems such a no-brainer.
It seems like, being the clever guy that he is, that number 6 could have phrased some questions or some challenges or something to him that would have revealed something useful to him in the future. But he, obviously if he asked him, so who do you work for? He did ask him that, but he asked him in a way like, what traitorous organization do you work for, instead of us loyal prisoner people. And of course the answer, I work for us. It's like, our side. I work for our side. Anyway, it's an enjoyable episode, but it's kind of light on deep, meaningful concepts. Except, of course, the pigeons, the classical music, perhaps some German poetry, some metaphors about tools and things. So, actually, come to think of it,
well, that's the Prisoner. I'll always give you something to
one of the better episodes in that respect. Yeah, I think I don't know that I have anything else. I did think it was very dark, that the opening was basically multiple suicide attempts.
Yes.
We have seen a suicide before, I think. In the very first episode, somebody jumped out the hospital window, but that turned out to be fake, I think. It turned out to be a fake suicide, and even then it was unclear whether he really committed suicide or somebody had thrown him out the window. This was pretty clear. She slit her wrists, which is a pretty gruesome way to try to kill yourself, and then ultimately took the break to jump out the window. So it was dark. It was very dark.
It was dark. It wasn't dwelled on, perhaps, for precisely that reason. But it was the Kickstarter for number 6's revenge drive. So I suppose it did need to have, a real reason for him to go for number 2.
Come to think of it, now that I think about that, this woman was captured not for information about that. It's information that she holds, but it's information about her husband. So is that the first example we have of somebody who's brought to the village not because of who they are? Does that make sense? It's obviously who she is his wife, and therefore that's why they brought her, but she's not the subject. Yeah.
And what she knows.
Yeah.
It's the first example I can think of, yeah.
And of course they've got the husband under surveillance enough to know he's got a mistress and dates and times, and yet they don't know where he is. So that was a little inconsistent, perhaps. But so what do we have for the next episode of The Prisoner?
Well, I believe the next one is The Girl Who Was Death.
Oh, I love The Girl Who Was Death. I love that one. I don't know what other people think about that one, but I love that episode.
Well, I'll tell you next time. But my expectations are high now.
I especially love the music in it. It's got a bit of a different score that's not in keeping with and it's very, very memorable to me. So
intriguing.
All right. Well, then, listeners, we hope you'll join us again next time on Fusion Patrol. We hope you've enjoyed this retro episode of the Fusion Patrol podcast here at the Fusion Patrol Classics YouTube channel. For new episodes of our audio podcast every week and our entire back catalog, come visit us at fusionpatrol.com or subscribe in iTunes or most anywhere fine or even disreputable podcasts are found. You can also support our podcast at patreon.com/fusionpatrol.